What if there was a way to explain the entire sweep of human history, from the very first campfire all the way to the digital age and beyond, using just one single idea? Today, we're diving into a theory that claims to do exactly that. It argues that everything, from slavery to modern finance, is driven by a predictable evolution of what we as a society value the most.
So what really drives human history? Is it the great leaders, the epic battles, the grand ideas? Well, according to the theory we're digging into today, the real driver is something way more fundamental, something that shapes how we live and work on the most basic level. Okay, so here's the core idea. Think of technological progress as the engine of history. But here's the twist. As our tools get better, what we value most, the dominant form of capital, also changes. And when that dominant capital shifts, the entire foundation of society gets a complete reboot right along with it.
So to get our heads around this journey, we need to know the 5 forms of capital that this theory says are the fuel for that engine. We're going to start with the value of just being a person, move on to the things we can control, like other people and land, and finally, we'll land in the world we all know today, with these abstract systems of money and credit.
So here's our plan for today. We'll start with the big picture, this theory of everything. Then we'll travel back to the very first form of capital. After that, we'll see how owning people and land changed the game. Then we'll tackle money, credit, and the crises they can bring. And finally, we'll look at where this theory says we're all headed next, this idea of a great societal return.
All right, let's dive into part 1, a theory of everything.
Okay, so this is the master timeline, and you should think of it less like a simple sequence of events and more like a set of dominoes. Each stage creates the exact conditions that inevitably knock over the next one, and the force pushing them all, it's always a shift in which type of capital holds all the power.
Okay, on to our second section. Let's rewind all the way back to the beginning, to the dawn of human society, and figure out what that very first, most basic form of capital really was.
We begin right here, in what this theory calls primitive society. Imagine an age of real scarcity, with only the most basic tools. What was the single most valuable thing a person or a tribe could possibly have?
Well, the answer is personality capital. You see, in those early hunter-gatherer groups, who got what was all decided based on who you were. Your family ties, your role in the group, your skill as a hunter or a leader, that was your value. Your actual identity was your capital, and it was the glue that kept the whole group alive. But, of course, things don't stay the same. New technology, like farming, created something brand new and totally revolutionary: surplus. Suddenly, there were more resources than what was needed just to survive. And when that happened, the whole definition of what capital even means started to change.
And that surplus, it pushes us into 2 new and pretty brutal stages, the slave and feudal societies. For the very first time in history, value wasn't just about who you are. It was about what you, or more importantly, what other people, could be forced to produce for you.
Now, look closely at this transition, because it's really important. At first, when you can create a surplus, the key to getting wealthy is to control the people doing the work. That's labor capital. But then, as societies got bigger, a new problem popped up. There just wasn't enough land for everyone. So power shifted again, this time to the people who owned the land itself. And that's the start of the era of production materials capital.
Okay, so production keeps getting bigger and bigger, which creates another explosion: trade. And for trade to work on a large scale, you need a new, more abstract way to represent value. This is what brings us into the modern age. So now we're entering the modern era, which this theory defines as both the capitalist and socialist stages. And this whole period is driven by 2 really powerful abstract forms of capital that, let's be honest, pretty much run our lives today: money and credit. First up, with trade going global, money capital becomes king. It's not really about owning land or labor directly anymore. Now it's about controlling the medium of exchange itself. If you can control the flow of money, you control how all of society's resources get handed out. But then industrial production becomes almost too good at its job. It creates a whole new problem. Factories are making way more stuff than people can actually afford to buy. This is where credit capital comes in. The whole economy starts to depend on social financing, loans, debt, credit cards, just to bridge that gap and keep the whole consumption machine going. Now, according to the theory, here's the rub. When you combine these 2 forces, money and credit capital, their built-in need to chase profits can make them expand completely out of control.
And that runaway expansion, that's pointed to as the root cause of the crazy boom and bust cycles and economic crises we see all the time in the modern world.
But crisis always forces change, right? This theory suggests that these problems are actually pushing humanity to find a new way forward, leading us to the final and maybe the most fascinating stage of this whole story. It's described as a return, but it's not a return to the past.
And that brings us here, to the final, projected stage of this journey. So, what comes after money and credit? What kind of capital could possibly define our future?
Well, the theory's answer is pretty mind-blowing. It's a return to the very beginning. We're apparently seeing the quiet reappearance of that very first form of capital, personality capital, but it's been totally transformed for the world we live in now.
So what does that actually mean? What does it look like? Well, think about things like universal public education or social healthcare systems. These are huge, complex structures built to give out resources not based on how much money you have, but simply based on your status as a person, as a citizen who has needs. Your humanity becomes your ticket in.
Now, this is super important. This is not about going back to living in small tribes. It's an evolution. This new kind of personality capital is built into our institutions, it's shared across entire societies, it's operating on a scale that would have been completely unimaginable in the ancient world. It's basically an upgrade.
So, in the end, the theory wraps up on a pretty hopeful note. It sees this whole long and often really brutal history as a kind of learning process for humanity. We're slowly, painfully moving away from systems where we distribute resources through conflict and fighting, and towards a system that's based on our shared value as human beings.
And that leaves us with one last thing to chew on. If we started this whole journey with our humanity as our most valuable asset, and now we're building global systems to honor that very idea, what does that tell you about the path we're on? Is history just a straight line, always moving forward? Or is it more like a circle or maybe a spiral, always returning to where it began, but on a whole new level?